Public relations has a public relations problem. What does that mean? Let me say it again. Public relations has a public relations problem. Think about it. When did you first hear of or even know anything about PR? I bet that you had experienced PR and its impact and were actually probably pretty familiar with what PR is, but you might have never heard that term before. And the things that you were experiencing that actually are PR, you likely were calling them something other than public relations. Let's think about some of the things that you've probably experienced that have pieces of PR in them. You likely engage with PR through the launch of your favorite album, your favorite music album, and all the ways that you learned more about that album, the cool ways that that artist decided to get his or her art in front of you as a potential audience. There are pieces of that that are all about engaging with PR. What your favorite celebrity or influencer recently said on Instagram. Absolutely aspects of the way in which we use digital platforms like Instagram and others, Instagram stories, Instagram live, to share things about our lives. Absolutely, parts of that have to do with PR. Learning more about your favorite nonprofit and the ways in which you can get involved to become a volunteer or maybe a donor or a real fan or friend of that organization. There are core components of that strategy that are all about PR. Even learning more about Belmont all along your college decision process, absolutely core aspects of that are completely related to public relations. Now, all of these things that we've named and more certainly have components of marketing and advertising and other pieces of strategic communications within them. But they also have aspects of PR, public relations, at their core. You likely called it something different in the moment, but it was absolutely the power and beauty of public relations at work. So we may not always be able to clearly state the definition of PR, but we do know what it is because we've experienced it. So then, what is PR? That's a really great question, and it's one that so many professionals and scholars and researchers have struggled with for years and years. Your book details this beautifully, because there are so many aspects of it that are hard to define. The Public Relations Society of America, PRSA, is one of the major professional development organizations for our industry, and they define PR as a strategic communications process that builds mutually beneficial relationships between an organization and its publics. PR at its core is all about relationship building. I say PR is everything. This is my definition. PR is everything you do and everything you don't do. It's everything you say and everything you don't say. Every decision that you make impacts you, if you're thinking about your own brand, or impacts your company or the client that you're representing. It all comes back to impact who you are and what you do. I really see PR as what I like to call a PR bank. Every day has an unlimited amount of opportunities to make deposits and withdrawals in and from your PR bank. And that can feel a little bit overwhelming when you think about every single decision impacting your brand, but it doesn't have to be, because every time we make a withdrawal or a poor decision that impacts our brand negatively, we have the opportunity to redo it with as many intentional deposits as we'd like. The opportunity to intentionally impact our PR bank is limitless, and we, as great PR practitioners, can get really creative. So yes, PR has a PR problem. So many of us, practitioners included, as your book points out, don't always understand what PR is, and we have a really hard time putting that definition into words. And obviously, that's a problem. But it just means we need to get intentional about educating others in our industry and around our industry about the work that we do. Just like we tell great stories for our clients and those we represent, we must do the same for ourselves. So with some intentionality and creativity, we can solve this challenge and our industry will be better for it.
Today we're going to talk about how we as PR professionals can use writing to help influence communication, how we can do our writing in a way that helps persuade people to agree with us. As PR professionals, we want desperately to not just communicate, not just send a message, but make sure the message we're sending is the message our audience is receiving, and make sure that that message is being sent in such a way that it might move our audience to believe or act in a certain way. This is hard to do. We have so many different things coming at us all the time, and our brains have set up ways to only pay attention to the things that we agree with and ignore the things we don't. We use these things inside our brains. We use selective retention, selective perception, and selective attention to pay attention to what we want to and ignore the things we don't. Here's an example of that. Let's say you're ready to buy a new car. You've made the decision that you are going to buy a certain car. And all of a sudden, everywhere you go, you see that car. It's not like there suddenly is a whole lot of new cars on the market and they're all yours. It's that you're now primed, you're paying attention, and you are seeing this. Your selective retention, selective perception, and selective attention is allowing you to pay attention in a way that you just hadn't before. So if we're communicators, and we're PR professionals, and we're trying to bring people over to our side, we want to use our words to do this. How? How can we break through all the tools our brains have worked out to make it so that we just stick with the things we already know and already agree with? Well, we want to write in such a way that we can help persuade and help get the attention of the people we're seeking. So the first thing we want to do is we want to think through who is our audience. If you are writing for an audience of third graders, you're going to write differently than if you're writing for an audience of college professors. And that should be true. And so you may have to think even more nuancedly about this. You may need to say, okay, I'm writing for health communication. Am I writing for people who are already victims of this health situation, or people who maybe if I get to them soon enough, they won't be? You write differently depending on who you're talking to. So think that through before you start to write. Also, know your end goal. Before you ever start to write, you're going to think through, what do I want this to lead to? So we'll talk soon in class about how you make a plan sheet and what that means and how you get to that goal before you even start writing any words toward it. You want to make sure you're establishing your credibility. You've got to be a trustworthy source. So sometimes that means you use quotes, sometimes you use statistics, sometimes you use charts and graphs. But you're going to figure out what's the best way that you can, in your writing, demonstrate that you are a trustworthy source related to this information. And then I say you always want to end with a call to action. When you end with a call to action, you give your reader a chance to take it further. So maybe you're encouraging them to learn more, or contact the representative, donate money, join a club. There's so many different ways they can take action, and you want to include that in your writing so that you can see if they follow through. So you know your goals, you know your audience. Now we want to talk about structuring. How are you going to structure your message? Well, make sure you put your arguments right up there. I'm here to tell you this, and this is why. Don't hesitate to get that argument out there and to make it clear, this is your argument. Then you want to refute opposing arguments. One thing that's important here is, when you give both sides the opportunity to be heard in your piece, it actually makes your argument stronger. It makes it more credible if you're highlighting and giving deference to the other opinion. You end by restating your argument. Don't shy away from giving the other side credibility, of saying, this is how they see it, and I can respect that, but la 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 la. You also want to go ahead, draw that conclusion, ask for an action, and then don't forget, as a communicator and a PR professional, your job is to reinforce, reinforce, reinforce. You need to probably share something with someone 9 times before they will even remember that they've heard it once. But if you're writing to persuade, if you're reinforcing with every single thing you do on behalf of your client or organization, you will find that you can break through the selective perception, attention, and retention that we all use to ignore messages and become a message that people start to hear.
More than 100 years ago, an American advertising advocate introduced the purchasing funnel to illustrate the theoretical journey a person takes from becoming aware of a product or service to actually making a purchase. Over the years, this funnel concept has remained relevant for a variety of marketing contexts. Let's use the funnel to visualize how any organization engages its publics. This becomes especially important when we consider how social media can be used to move our publics through various levels in relationship to our client or organization. At the top of the funnel are our key publics. These are the individuals or groups that are aware of our organization. The first step of engagement, once our publics are aware, is to motivate them to become followers. Following is a low-risk activity that shows some level of interest. It could simply be visiting our website or our Facebook page. A slightly deeper level would be liking and following us on social media: Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube. The next step is to convert our followers to subscribers. This level of engagement involves the first real transaction in the relationship, usually the sharing of contact information. The individual may give their name, address, phone number, or other basic information to opt in for communication from the organization. In return, they get an email, newsletters, or other exclusive content. As communication professionals, we must be good stewards of the personal information our publics have willingly shared with us so that we don't damage the trust that they're placing in us. We also need to provide them with meaningful content that really facilitates authentic communication that they perceive as valuable. If we don't, we'll definitely see an increase in the number of requests to unsubscribe. Now, up to this point in the funnel, most of our communication has been one way, flowing from the organization to the publics. The next level represents engaged publics. These are individuals or groups who are giving back to the organization in some deeper way. Now, that's giving back beyond their attention. Here, they may be making a purchase, attending an event, volunteering, or even donating money. This is where the traditional marketing funnel tends to stop. Organizations have converted their leads to customers. However, as public relations and social media professionals, we have an opportunity to further cultivate the relationship with our publics. Through continued strategy and authentic communication, we can move some of our engaged publics to become loyalists. These are the individuals who continue to buy, who donate, who continue to volunteer. Ultimately, we seek to create influencers or advocates for our brand. Now, don't let the term influencer confuse you. These aren't the Instagram and TikTok stars. They're not the mega or the mass influencers. Instead, these are the micro and, even more importantly, the nano influencers. These are the people that we want to advocate for our organization. They use their communication channels, their social networks, to encourage and support others through this engagement funnel. It's all organic. They recommend our organization. They come to our defense. This model really helps us to think through the relationships an organization can have with its publics. So right now, I want you to think about a brand or an organization that you like. Where are you in this engagement funnel? What are some of the pivotal points that moved you from one level to the next level?
Today in public relations research, we're going to look at this sentence. Public relations is a soft science. Now, some will disagree with us that public relations is a science at all. They will say that public relations is a creative endeavor. But really, public relations is a science because it is a systematic study of behaviors and structures all around us. But there's another word that I want us to pay attention to, and that is soft. Public relations is a soft science. Now, what in the world do we mean by that? Well, if you think about it, very often in science, we are working with things that are visible. We want to know how tall grass grows. We're going to measure it. We want to see see how healthy grass is, we're going to look at the color. But in public relations, we're not able to do that. Let's take, for example, the idea of loyalty. Loyalty is something that public relations is really interested in. How loyal are people to an organization? So if we look at this from a hard science perspective, what color is it? Is it green? Is it purple? Okay, well, how tall is it? How many inches is strong loyalty? Well, it doesn't work. And the reason is because loyalty is invisible. And that's what makes public relations a soft science, is that we're working with the invisible and we're making it visible. So how do we see loyalty? Well, let me give you two research terms. First, construct. Loyalty is our construct. Loyalty is what we are trying to pay attention to. Loyalty is what we're trying to see. In public relations, very often our construct is invisible, and we're trying to figure out a way to see that. Now, how we figure out how to see that, that is our operational definition. The operational definition is how we're going to take this construct, loyalty, that's invisible, and how we're going to make it visible. So very quickly, let's consider how we might make loyalty visible. Is loyalty when someone recommends an organization to others? Maybe, but it's not quite right. It just doesn't fit just right. So maybe a better way to make loyalty visible is to consider it as longevity, when someone returns to that organization again and again and again. And so now we've managed to make loyalty, which was invisible, we've managed to make it visible because we can pay attention to a person's return visits to that organization. So let me leave you again with this idea. Public relations is a soft science. We take the invisible and we make it visible. And that's what makes public relations exciting. It makes our research really hard, but it makes our understanding deep.
Today we're going to talk a little bit about how we look at public relations cases and why. So when we're looking at a case, and a true case analysis is probably a 5 or 10 page paper with multiple sources, and a presentation on it would be a good 10-15 minutes. So I'm going to condense some of this here. But when we look at cases, we're looking at them to learn what to do and what not to do. We're looking at what businesses have done that we can learn from. And so you'll define the organization, describe it, articulate a problem, go through its situation analysis, discuss it in context of the 4-step process: research, plan, implement, evaluate, looking at its goals, objectives, strategies, tactics, audience, message. So they go pretty deep. And they also, case analyses, look at theoretical underpinnings. In other words, theories that could potentially describe what was done, and ethical implications, like what ethical provisions were applied in this business situation. And so there are a myriad of lessons we can learn related to what to do and what not to do. So that's why we look at cases. So we know that public relations is the strategic communication process that builds mutually beneficial relationships between an organization and the various publics upon whom its success or failure depends. And one way to do that is through the concept of corporate social responsibility. So that is a concept through which companies integrate social and environmental concerns into business operations and in their interactions with stakeholders voluntarily, so that they can show that they are behaving responsibly and practicing sustainable business operations. So we've all seen companies that have been criticized for their business practices. One example would be Apple, and we know that now it produces an annual supplier responsibility practice report, which is sort of its accountability to the world, saying we believe in human rights and this is what we're doing as a company to prevent human rights abuses. Now, some companies do this reactively, as in Apple's case, but other companies do this proactively. And so one example of a company that does this proactively is Ben & Jerry's ice cream. And Ben & Jerry's considers what they do to go beyond corporate responsibility to, as they express it, business activism. And so one of the ways they do this is through
clarity in its alignment from the mission all the way to their actions. So Ben & Jerry's has a three-pronged mission that says that they will produce quality products and that they focus on economic sustainability, which is different than focusing on economic profitability, and that they believe in social impact. And in order to create social impact as a business, they have focused on 10 issues that they will invest in and support. The first of which is racial justice, and then democracy, fair trade, LGBTQ equality, peace building, refugees, and things related to GMO and bovine growth hormone. So they have espoused belief in these issues for years, and they align their business practices and their activism with all of these areas. So the reason Ben & Jerry's is good to look at as far as learning from them is if you consider the context of 2020, when we've got a myriad of things happening from the pandemic to societal unrest and much activism related to diversity, equity, inclusion. So if you'll consider how many companies are, for the first time in 2020, saying anything about their beliefs at all, their beliefs related to racial justice, their beliefs related to saying anything at all. There's so many companies who are just now entering the space. Well, we can learn from Ben & Jerry's as an organization that has been in the space for a very long time, and they have practiced aligning their operations with their espoused beliefs. And so they're a good example of a company that we can learn from. So in 2020, if we consider that the situational crisis communication theory, as many companies are experiencing it, a myriad of crises, Ben & Jerry's is not, because this theory tells us that there are definite things that you should be doing in the pre-crisis stage, and post-crisis stage to ensure business sustainability. And Ben & Jerry's has been doing this for such a long time that they're in a unique position to be a leader that other organizations are looking toward for ways to make themselves known in a space that they're very new to. So that's just a little bit about this case. A true case analysis would be a good 15 minutes. So I'd love to see you guys in class someday.
What's the difference between a public relations campaign and a project or a program? A project is a short-lived activity, a program is an ongoing activity, and a campaign includes a set of activities, including research, planning, implementation, and evaluation. A campaign addresses an organization's current problems, opportunities, or challenges. In public relations campaigns class, students work in teams to plan and implement a campaign for a real-world organization. When we do a public relations campaign for an organization, we practice all our skills: storytelling, information gathering, strategy, critical thinking, teamwork, problem solving, communication, and professionalism. When we conduct an effective campaign, everybody wins. Students have a great project to talk about. The community partner benefits. We make a positive difference in the real world. Our students are award winners.